In this video, we're going to learn how to configure a connection between a React application and an ASP.NET Core application. The idea is that we're going to have a web API in ASP.NET Core as the backend and a React application as the front end. And in order for us to establish that connection, we need to configure CORS in the web API. CORS is a security mechanism that allows us to deny HTTP requests from foreign origins. The idea is that we have to configure that we want to receive in the web API HTTP requests from this URL. So that is what we're going to learn in this video. But before that, if you want to learn more about how to build web applications using React and ASP.NET Core, buy my Udemy course today. Link with a discount to this course in the description of this video. Alright, so back to the tutorial. So this is a newly created React application and the same goes for the web API. So let's come here to Visual Studio Code and I want to delete all of this code that I have here in this app component. And also let me delete this and let me also delete this. So what we're going to do is that we're going to use an useEffect React hook. The idea is that I want to execute a piece of functionality after my component renders, and for that I can use a useEffect. So let me say useEffect, and let me pass here the effect, and I will pass an empty dependencies list because I only want to execute this useEffect once. So here I will use the fetch API. Of course, we can use Axios if we want to, but in this case, with the fetch API, it will suffice. So let me pass here the URL of my web API. Let's come back here. Let me copy this and paste this here. Don't worry, we're going to learn how to put this in an environment variable later in this same video. So now let me say here, then, I have to say then because fetch returns a promise, so we have to use then. Let me say here response, and then I will say response JSON, and JSON also returns a promise, so we also have to say then. So let me say here this so that you can visualize everything better. Then here I will receive a JSON, and what am I going to do with this JSON? Well, I want to be able to update the UI using this JSON, so that means that we have to introduce a state in our component. So let's come here and let me say const destructuring weather forecast, comma, set weather forecast equal to use state. So I want to indicate what data type is this weather forecast going to be. In my case, it is going to be an array. Therefore, I will create a model that will represent a weather forecast. So let me say here weather forecast.model.ts, and in here I will say export default interface weather forecast date string temperature in C, number and summary string. This comes from this endpoint weather forecast that we have here, date, temperature in C, and summary. Alright, so let's come back here. Let me save, let's come back here. This will be, by the way, an array, so I will use plural here. So weather forecasts and set weather forecasts. And let me say here the data type. For that I can say weather forecast array. Alright, so now I can use the set weather forecasts to update the state of my component. As you can see here, I am passing JSON to set weather forecasts. Now I can come here and I can update the UI using this data that I have here. So let me use a JSX expression here and let me say weather forecasts ternary operator, and I will say here a diff. This is in the case that the array has values, or otherwise I will just say loading. Alright, so in here, I will come here and I will say another list, and then I want to say here expression weather forecast map weather forecast, and I will say here list item, and let me say here key weather forecast dot date, which is a unique value, expression backtick, and let me say here the date, this, and then the summary. And finally, I want to put in parentheses, here I want to say WF, the temperature in Celsius. So we're ready to test, right? Let's come back here then. Let's come here and let's see that in here we only have loading. And if I press F12, you are going to see that we have a CORS policy error. This means that we need to configure that we want to be able to receive HTTP requests from this URL in our web API. So let's do that. Let's come here to Visual Studio Again, this is a newly created web API. Let's come here to app settings development JSON, and in here I want to say allowed origins, and let me say here an array, and in here I will put this. But please make sure that you don't have this slash here at the end, because otherwise this will not work, because the comparison is made without the slash, and therefore it will not be a match if there is a slash here. So please remove it. Alright, so we have this allowed origins here. Now I want to come to the program class because I want to configure CORS. So let me say here var allowed origins builder configuration get sections allowed origins get a string array. So as you can see here, this allowed origins is this value that we have here, an array of strings of the valid origins from which we want to receive HTTP requests. So let's come here and now let's actually configure CORS. Let's say here builder services at CORS options at default policy options CORS with origins. Here we're indicating which origins we want to accept. So allowed origins, this array of strings. We want to allow any method that is HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete, patch, etc. and allow any header. This refers to headers in the HTTP request. Alright, so now let's come here and after this use HTTPS redirection, let me say here use CORS. Alright, and with this we're good to go. Control F5 to run our application. Let's come here, let me refresh, and let's see that now we have this information here, which is great, but we have not finished because I need to come back here and let's remember that I have hard-coded this here, which is not wise because right now, yes, we're in development and therefore I want to use this API URL, but in production I want to use another URL, and therefore I want to have this in an environment variable so that in development we're going to use one URL and then in production we're going to use another URL. So what we're going to do is that since I created my application with Vite, I will use the following. I will come here, I can click on here for example, because I want to create a new file and that file has to be outside of the src directory. So let me say here .env for the environment variables, and as I said, because I created a project with Vite, it means that my public environment variables have to be prefixed with Vite. So Vite underscore API underscore URL for example. Alright, so in here I will put my URL, so this URL, the URL of the web API, so this. I want to remove this from here. It is not mandatory, but I prefer it that way. So this is the file that we're going to use in development. And now let me create the one that we're going to use in production. So .env.production. Alright, so let me repeat this here, but I will just say here pending because we don't have the URL from production. Alright, so let's come here to the app component, and in here I want to say, I want to change this to backtick and this also to backtick because now this will be an expression and I will say import meta env Vite API URL. That is this environment variable name that we have here. Alright, so this was it. Ctrl K S to save everything and let's come back here. Let me refresh just in case, and as you can see, indeed, we have established a communication channel between our React application and our web API in ASP.NET Core. Thank you.